What is the hidden system behind the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court? Who was responsible for her selection and preparation? Who is funding the effort to get her confirmed? Who is counting on her to side with President Trump if he loses the election, and expects the Supreme Court to declare him the winner? Inside the Progressive Talk Zone, our House of Public Discourse virtual team has all the answers with your host, Johnny Hill.
Hello, and welcome to the Progressive Talk Zone. I'm Johnny. Let me begin with the most current part of the story, which comes just a little bit after our source Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the secret hub of the radical right. A new book from journalist and investigator Ann Nelson, published when the conservative movement is facing a very decisive encounter with the very forces it's been trying to defeat now for 40 years. In her book, she exposes the powerful Council for National Policy.
You put the wrong justices on the Supreme Court, and this country will never, ever be the same. We have to pick one that's going to be there for 40 years.
From one of the 20 judges on my list who will uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The organization that has driven the conservative movement for the past 40 years. During Ronald Reagan's campaign against the Sandinistas, to their success in trumping the Supreme Court. What do these shadow networks have to say about the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court? How are they reacting? We did some research for this forum. They consider it a great triumph and a culmination of 40 years of effort. And we are reluctant to use the term conservative because this is the extreme right wing for me. It is so far removed from mainstream American public opinion that I believe it to be in a different category, both in terms of its ideology and its tactics. However, as long ago as the 1970s, the Heritage Foundation was working to change the political landscape, under the direction of Paul Weyrich, one of the architects of the movement. Weyrich was repeatedly frustrated by moderates in the Republican Party, and people willing to work with Democrats, to contribute to the development of policy and solutions to public problems. He created organizations and initiated tactics that he openly declared should destroy the regime, as he called it, which would be the end of the present-day American federal government.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
What Weyrich is really saying in a nutshell are, the fewer people vote, the better their chances are of winning.
That's right, Johnny. Hello, I'm Abby Conklin, research consultant with the all-new House of Public Discourse Radio.com. Our research found from the beginning, in terms of their electoral tactics, it has been a matter of weaponizing certain churches and pastors, and really exerting tremendous pressure on them to use churches as instruments of a radical right ideology, and then using similar tactics to suppress votes for Democrats, especially in key battleground states.
Thus, we must conclude that these shadow organizations are to the right of the Republican Party. They are not just a splinter group of the Republican Party. They are not merely fundraisers for the Republican Party. However, they are politically and organizationally taking the Republican Party to the extreme right.
For sure. And to my surprise, their model was the Southern Baptists. They decided they had to move it to the right. In order to elevate their supporters, they had to resort to questionable tactics, to influential positions of power in Southern Baptist churches, convention of moderates in the seminary, and in the colleges, and among the pastors. They weren't messing around. And these tactics were developed. They extended it to the Republican Party. And you had the same kind of policy of eliminating moderates, some of whom had served their communities for years.
Abby, among our younger viewers, we should point out that at the time the Southern Baptist Convention was the largest Protestant denomination in America. Today it still is. 16.5 million members, scattered throughout the South and the West. In an op-ed piece from the New York Times published earlier this month, Amy Coney Barrett is said to represent a new conservatism rooted in faith. Does that make sense to you?
Not really, Johnny. Because as a conservative Catholic, she follows the pattern set by Brett Kavanaugh and Antonin Scalia. Well, that is not very fresh. According to our source Shadow Network, is the way these interlocking organizations support each other. The book is about a radical right-wing organization called the Council for National Policy, which is very secretive and brings together big donors like the DeVos family and oil interests in Texas and Oklahoma. Political operatives, such as the leadership of the Federalist Society, for example. Amy Coney Barrett is a member of the Federalist Society. She has been an honored guest at their events for more than a few years. It includes the head of Hillsdale College, which is one of their campus partners. Amy Coney Barrett was the commencement speaker at Hillsdale College this year. So there are all of these organizations. That has been turning its wheels to promote her really for several years, going back our research found. She was previously suggested for a Supreme Court nomination, and the opinion of the House of Public Discourse Forum is that she would not have been included in those lists had she not conformed to their traditional idea of an activist judge. Speaking of the Council for National Policy, one of their main projects is the anti-abortion movement. Organizations such as the Susan B. Anthony List and Concerned Women for America and other groups, which are against the interests of environmentalists from the fossil fuels industry. Therefore, our research shows a roadmap of what to expect moving forward. Historically, the Council for National Policy has had approximately 400 members. Initially, it included people with large sums of money, many of which were from the Texas and Oklahoma oil industries. Additionally, there is the DeVos family of Michigan from the Amway fortune, and Betsy DeVos, of course. So they have big money to pay for things. It includes the leaders of the so-called grassroots organizations. So-called because such groups do not develop on their own, the way that you would expect from the name. They have a lot of money, and it is organized from the top down. So, for example, the National Rifle Association, their leadership is part of the CNP. They get money from the donors, they organize their millions of members. And you mix these with the strategists and the media owners. Our study found the power of fundamentalist and conservative radio in swing states, things that people on the East Coast tend to neglect considerably. And the same thing with fundamentalist broadcasting, which has numerous broadcasters such as the Christian Broadcasting Network and the Trinity Broadcasting Network, have really turned into outlets replicating the messaging from this organization. Therefore, they support and complement each other. And we should.
You're inside the Progressive Talk Zone with Johnny Hill on the all-new House of Public Discourse Radio.com.
Facts has to say that demographically its time has passed. Abby, the United States has become more diverse religiously, ethnically, and racially. And they recognize that their core positions are not supported by the majority of Americans. So, they went to the limit, pulled out all the stops to get Trump elected by a tiny margin, but they doubt that they can do that again. The signs are not good. What they can do is make their hold on the federal courts concrete through the Supreme Court, and therefore get majorities in cases like gerrymandering, voter suppression, and their political activation of the churches with tax-exempt status, and further their hold on power through the courts. As Ann Nelson suggested in her book Shadow Network, one can only speculate. A straight line from Amy Coney Barrett's position to Leonard Leo's. A very conservative Catholic is Leonard Leo. He's been the Federalist Society's driving force for years. And more recently he has shifted from that position to a more activist position. Amy Coney Barrett had already joined the Federalist Society. She took advantage of the pipeline established by the Federalist Society. So with this in mind, they would be quite close to each other. Another important figure is Carrie Severino, who is from the Judicial Crisis Network, which was co-founded by Leonard Leo, again very right-wing Catholics, who have tended to be overlooked, while most people focus on the fundamentalists. But Ralph Reed, who has been somebody who has been active with the fundamentalist politicization for decades, said. A few years ago, he publicly said the next step to their campaign was to court the Catholic vote, and they've been aggressively doing that in recent years. Then there's Don McGahn, who was the chief White House counsel for 3 years under Donald Trump, graduate of the University of Notre Dame, a fan of Amy Coney Barrett, who was scouting himself for recruits to train and bring up, groom, and put in the mix for potential Supreme Court justices. Our source tells us that he was keen on her, had talked to Leo, and you had these people in the White House and legal forces behind her, knowing that she was one of them.
Guys, I'm guessing they've had enough embarrassment over the Kavanaugh hearings. This is Ramblin' Rose, an investigative reporter with House of Public Discourse Radio.com. Sexual harassment being the order of the day. It was convenient to bring a woman to the top to avoid that. So, there were a number of elements in her favor. Our source and Collins added that in the process of these nominations Trump cut a deal in 2016 with this movement, and it was reported that he was going to accept lists of nominees from 3 organizations run by the Council for National Policy members, the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, and the National Rifle Association. And he has actually followed suit with that. The Federalist Society has taken the lead on this. The Heritage Foundation plays a central role in all of these proceedings, as well as the NRA.
The Council of National Policy was in attendance for the announcement of Amy Coney Barrett, a super spreader event. Why, as a matter of fact. Accordingly, to our source, Ann Collins said, I've got the September 2020 membership list. So I went through the USA Today's publication of who was present at that event, which has been called the COVID Super Spreader event on September 29th. And what I found was that they had 6 members of the White House staff, 9 members of Congress, and 14 current members of the Council for National Policy. What concerns us most at the all-new House of Public Discourse Radio.com virtual team. The critical moment in those hearings came when they asked her if it was against the law to interfere with the vote in a federal election. And she couldn't answer that. For our team, either marked an ignorance or disregard of the law. That is alarming on the eve of an election. 14, and 12 of them were from the leadership, the Board of Governors and the Gold Circle elite members. So, they were there in force. This was a culmination of plans they had been working on for decades. But if she is willing to put people at risk that way, to accompany the president, by failing to follow Centers for Disease Control guidelines, may we inquire about her judgment? I mean, could she not have said, Mr. President, I'm honored by this nomination, but can you wait until there are better days for us to do this? The name that kept popping up in our study of Ann Nelson's book Shadow Network was Ginny Thomas, wife of the Chief Justice Thomas.
Old, my God, Johnny. In an interview, Hall of Fame journalist Bill Moyer said of Ginny Thomas, she is one of the most powerful and fierce women in Washington. She is really the tip of the spear in these efforts. Our research ran across her repeatedly. And she's on the executive committee of CNP Action, which is their lobbying arm. She also interacts a lot with Charlie Kirk, another CNP member, who runs something called Turning Point USA. She also writes for this right-wing website called The Daily Caller, which is owned by members of the Council for National Policy. So Ginny Thomas, who is from Omaha, is married to a Supreme Court justice, who is a public as well as a private radical right-wing activist across the country. I'm not sure how spouses of Supreme Court justices are supposed to behave, but I find it hard to believe people think this is appropriate.
You're inside the Progressive Talk Zone with House of Public Discourse founder and host, Johnny Hill.
In closing, our review of Shadow Networks bears out what we have been reporting since 2014. Here in the House of Public Discourse Forum. What we are observing is how the few lord it over the many, and in turn, how man rules man to his own injury. Yes, these are critical times, hard to deal with. It is the view of the all-new House of Public Discourse Radio.com. The last thing we need in America's highest court, with America's populace becoming increasingly diverse, is a Christian right-wing zealot like Amy Coney Barrett seems to be. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe and like our YouTube channel. Thanks.